The Florida sun beat down on Adventureland, a bustling amusement park filled with the excited shouts of children and the whir of roller coasters. Sarah and David, holding hands, navigated the crowds with their two kids, Lily, 6, and Tom, 8. It was supposed to be a perfect family day, a break from their normal, quiet lives. Lily clutched a bright pink balloon, while Tom, eyes wide with wonder, pointed at every new attraction. They were heading for the famous Sea Serpent Splash, a ride both kids had been talking about for weeks. The line was long, snaking through a shaded queue, but the promise of a thrilling splash at the end kept everyone's spirits high. Just as they neared the front, a group of 3 men, loud and clearly having had too much to drink, pushed past them. They cut in front of Lily, making her stumble. Sarah, a kind but firm woman, gently touched the shoulder of the lead man. "Excuse me," she said, her voice polite. "We've been waiting for a while." The man, a burly guy with a sneer, turned around. He looked Sarah up and down, a nasty grin on his face. "Oh, did I cut in front of Little Miss Perfect?" he slurred, then shoved Sarah with his forearm. She gasped, stumbling back into David. Her eyes went wide with shock and a flicker of fear. The man then turned his attention to David, who had instinctively put an arm around Sarah. "What are you going to do about it, tough guy?" the bully sneered, his friends chuckling behind him. He looked at David, then at the kids, who were now clinging to their parents, their faces pale. "Look at this wimp. Can't even stand up for his woman. What a joke!" He laughed, a harsh, grating sound, and spit on the ground near David's shoes. David, an unassuming man with kind eyes, remained eerily calm. His gaze, however, sharpened, locking onto the bully with an intense focus that was almost chilling. He didn't raise his voice, didn't clench his fists. He simply looked at the man, a quiet resolve settling over his features. "You've just made a very serious mistake," David said, his voice low, almost a whisper. But it cut through the park noise with surprising clarity. The bully just scoffed, clearly not taking him seriously. Then David slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He held it up, discreetly, but clearly recording the 3 men. He panned the camera, capturing their faces, their aggressive postures, and the smirk on the lead bully's face. The men, still laughing, didn't seem to notice or care. David didn't engage further. He just held the phone steady, a silent, chilling determination etched into his face. It was a promise, unspoken but clear, that this wouldn't end here. Moments later, park security, alerted by other patrons who had witnessed the scene, moved in. 2 guards, looking serious, approached the group. The bullies, still trying to act tough, were quickly escorted away from the line. They were laughing, joking, and making light of the situation, completely unaware that their actions had just triggered something far greater than a minor park dispute. They thought they had won. Some mountains are best left undisturbed. As the bullies were led away, their taunts fading into the distance, David turned to his shaken family. He put a protective arm around Lily and Tom, pulling them close. Sarah leaned into him, her breath still a little shaky. David met her eyes, a silent message passing between them. He whispered, his voice firm and steady, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." The tension in the air, thick with unspoken consequences, lingered long after the men were gone. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. David's quiet strength, the kind that made him seem unassuming, wasn't something he picked up overnight. It was forged in the dusty, working-class streets of a small town in the rural Texas. a place where folks learned early on that actions spoke louder than words. He grew up in a humble home, surrounded by a family that valued hard work, respect, and looking out for your own. There wasn't much money, but there was plenty of love and an abundance of life lessons. His father, a man of few words but firm principles, taught him how to fix anything with his hands and how to stand tall, even when standing alone. His mother, with her gentle spirit, showed him the power of kindness and the importance of community. Sundays were for church and weeknights were for homework, followed by chores. It was a simple life, but it laid a strong foundation. His early years were spent exploring the woods behind their house, fishing in the local creek, and learning to hunt with his dad and uncles. These weren't just hobbies. They were ways of life, teaching him patience, observation, and the responsibility that came with providing. He learned the rhythm of the land and the unspoken rules of their tight-knit community. Respect wasn't just a word. It was something earned through consistent behavior, through showing up for your neighbors, and through treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their station. David saw firsthand how a quiet, strong demeanor could command more respect than any loud boast. Even back then, David harbored a deep-seated desire to protect. He remembered seeing older kids picking on smaller ones, or a family struggling and feeling a pang of injustice. He wasn't the type to jump into fights, but he always found a way to intervene, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. This feeling, this innate drive to shield the vulnerable, grew stronger with every passing year. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing what was right. This desire to serve, to protect on a larger scale, was what eventually led him to join the Navy right out of high school. He saw it as the ultimate expression of his values, a chance to be part of something bigger than himself. The bullies in the amusement park, with their crude remarks and aggressive posturing, were not an isolated incident for David. They represented a recurring pattern he had encountered throughout his life. There were always those who sought to exert power through intimidation, who saw kindness as weakness, and who preyed on others without consequence. From the playground to the military, he'd seen them. This particular incident, however, felt different. It wasn't just about him. It was about his family, his children, witnessing something ugly and feeling threatened. That's why it resonated so deeply, striking a nerve that had been carefully managed for years. His time as a Navy SEAL was where his discipline, tactical thinking, and ability to remain calm under extreme pressure were truly honed. The training was brutal, designed to break you down and rebuild you stronger, sharper, more resilient. He learned to control every reaction, to assess threats with a clear head, and to act decisively when necessary, but always with a calculated approach. Emotion was a luxury in combat. Precision and control were necessities. This background explains his seemingly controlled response in the park. It wasn't weakness or fear. It was the ingrained discipline of a warrior, assessing the situation, gathering intelligence, and refusing to be provoked into a rash emotional reaction. The underlying emotional trigger, however, was undeniable. It was the primal instinct of a father protecting his young, mixed with the deep-seated frustration of a man who had seen too many bullies get away with too much for too long. He knew how to pick his battles, and more importantly, he knew how to win them. Over the years, David and Sarah had faced their share of small frustrations and disrespect, little things that chipped away at their peace. They often just let them go, choosing peace for their children over confrontation. These weren't huge battles, but they added up, creating tiny cracks in David's calm exterior. He remembered the neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who consistently parked his beat-up truck halfway into their driveway, making it impossible for Sarah to back out easily. Every morning, Sarah would sigh, carefully maneuver her car, and David would just grit his teeth, telling himself it wasn't worth a fight. He'd even offered to help Mr. Henderson fix his own driveway, hoping the hint would work, but it never did. Then there was the time at Sarah's old job. Her colleague, Brenda, often made little digs about Sarah's mom's schedule, implying she wasn't as dedicated because she left on time for pickup or missed after-work gatherings. Brenda would say things like, "Must be nice to have a flexible schedule for your little ones," with a tone that wasn't nice at all. Sarah would come home upset, and David, always trying to be supportive, would tell her to ignore it, that Brenda was just jealous. But inside, he felt a slow burn. He wanted to march down there and tell Brenda off, but he knew it would only make things worse for Sarah at work. So he swallowed his anger again. There were other moments, too, where David felt like he was being taken advantage of because of his good nature. He'd lent money to a relative who never paid it back, or spent hours helping a friend with a project, only for that friend to disappear when David needed a hand. Each time, he'd rationalized it, telling himself it was better to be the bigger person, to avoid conflict. But these instances, big and small, created a quiet resentment within him. He was a man who believed in fairness and reciprocity and in standing up for what was right. Yet, for the sake of his family, for the sake of peace, he often chose to absorb the slight. In their community, direct confrontation wasn't always the first choice. People tended to talk around problems or hope they would go away. For men especially, there was this unspoken expectation to be stoic, to handle things without making a fuss. David had grown up with that idea. Men were strong, silent protectors. Raising his voice or getting into a public argument felt like a failure of that ideal, like he was losing control, so he kept a lot of his frustrations bottled up, believing it was the best way to keep his family safe and stable. He'd seen plenty of situations where an argument just made things worse, drawing more attention and creating more problems. He didn't want that for Sarah or the kids. The amusement park incident, however, was different. It wasn't a minor annoyance or a subtle jab. It was a public humiliation, a direct physical threat to Sarah, and a verbal assault on his family right in front of his children. It was a line crossed, a boundary shattered. It wasn't just about the bullies. It was about every single time he had held back, every slight he had absorbed, every injustice he had let slide. The fear in his children's eyes, the shame on Sarah's face. It was all too much. This wasn't just an isolated event. It was the final push, the culmination of years of suppressed frustration. This was the moment his long-held restraint finally broke, not with an explosion, but with a cold, clear resolve. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this time, things would be different. Following the amusement park incident, the emotional atmosphere within David and Sarah's home became noticeably heavy. Sarah was visibly shaken, often catching herself staring blankly, lost in thought. The children, usually so boisterous, were quieter, more clingy, and fearful. They constantly asked about the mean men, their innocent questions like tiny daggers twisting in David's gut. He found himself answering their questions with forced calm, trying to reassure them while his own insides churned. The memory of their terror, the way they had cowered behind him, played on a loop in his mind. David struggled internally with his controlled response at the park. He knew he had a plan, a reason for his restraint, but the primal urge to protect, to lash out immediately, had been immense. He felt the weight of his perceived inaction in the moment, a silent burden that pressed down on him. Even though his mind told him it was the right strategic move, his heart ached with the image of his family's distress, and a part of him wondered if he should have just exploded. This internal conflict was almost as draining as the incident itself. He started to research the men, using his past skills to gather information discreetly. Hours were spent in front of his computer after everyone else was asleep, piecing together fragments of public information, cross-referencing names, and searching social media. It was a tedious, methodical process, but his Navy SEAL training had taught him patience and thoroughness. He didn't want to just react. He wanted to understand, to dismantle. News of the incident, or at least a version of it, spread through their local community like wildfire. Social media, as it often does, amplified the story, twisting details and adding its own flavor. Some neighbors expressed genuine sympathy, stopping Sarah at the grocery store to offer kind words or a comforting hand. But others, often through veiled comments or knowing glances, subtly questioned why David hadn't done more at the park. "If that were my family," one well-meaning but misguided neighbor remarked, "I would have taught those punks a lesson right there." These comments, though perhaps not intended maliciously, added to his internal pressure, making him feel like he had failed not just his family, but also the unspoken expectations of his community. David felt the judgment, a silent chorus of, "Why didn't he?" echoing in his mind. Meanwhile, the bullies, completely unaware of David's background or his quiet determination, were emboldened by their initial perceived victory and lack of immediate physical retaliation. They took to social media themselves, posting gloating remarks and thinly veiled taunts. One of them shared a meme about soft guys who can't handle a little fun, clearly referencing David. Another posted a picture of themselves laughing, with a caption that read, "Some people just don't know how to take a joke." These posts, circulated by their friends, further provoked David and fueled his resolve. They saw David's restraint as weakness, a confirmation of their own perceived dominance. Their arrogance was a constant, irritating buzz in the back of his mind. David felt a profound sense of responsibility to his family and a deep-seated need for justice. The judgment from the community, the fear still lingering in his children's eyes, and the bullies' continued arrogance created an almost unbearable emotional burden. It was a suffocating feeling, a constant pressure that pushed him closer and closer to a definitive action. He couldn't let this go. Not now. Not after everything. The thought of letting these men get away with it, of allowing his children to believe that such behavior went unpunished, was simply unacceptable. He knew he had to act, not out of rage, but with the cold, calculated precision he had learned years ago. The quiet man was about to show them what true strength looked like. Then came the turning point, a discovery that shifted David's entire perspective and solidified his resolve. Through his meticulous research, he stumbled upon something truly sickening. The lead bully, the one who had shoved Sarah and mocked him in front of his kids, was named Mark. And this Mark was not just some random jerk. He was a prominent figure in a local charity organization. Not just any charity, but one that claimed to support military veterans. The irony, the sheer hypocrisy of it all, hit David like a physical blow. This man, who publicly disrespected a veteran and his family, paraded himself as a benefactor of the very community he scorned. It was a devastating revelation, exposing Mark's true character in the most disgusting way imaginable. This wasn't just about a park incident anymore. It was about integrity, about honor, about the very values David had dedicated his life to upholding. Instead of direct confrontation, which his SEAL training had taught him, was often the least effective path, David began to formulate a meticulous plan. He wouldn't stoop to Mark's level. He would use Mark's own platform, his carefully constructed public image, to bring about his downfall. David decided to expose Mark's true character, not with fists, but with facts, with undeniable truth. His military intelligence skills, honed over years of covert operations and strategic planning, kicked into high gear. He saw the situation not as a street fight, but as a mission, requiring precision, patience, and an understanding of the enemy's weaknesses. Mark, completely unaware of David's history, his intentions, or the quiet storm brewing, continued his charade. He maintained his public persona of a benevolent community leader, attending galas, giving speeches, and shaking hands, all while, privately, David discovered, he made disparaging remarks about veterans. Mark even attempted to leverage his charity connections, subtly spreading rumors and trying to discredit David when he heard whispers about David's past and the park incident. He painted David as an unstable, aggressive individual, trying to preempt any potential fallout. Mark truly believed he was untouchable, protected by his carefully cultivated image and his network of oblivious supporters. He didn't know he was playing a game of chess with a grandmaster. Then, an unexpected opportunity presented itself, almost too perfect to be true. David learned that Mark was scheduled to be the keynote speaker at an upcoming charity gala, a major event that would draw local dignitaries, media, and many of the community's influential figures. This was it. This was the perfect stage, the grand arena, where David could expose the truth, not just to a few onlookers, but to the entire community that Mark had so thoroughly deceived. The thought sent a jolt of adrenaline through David. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about stripping away the false facade and revealing the true nature of a man who preyed on others while hiding behind a shield of philanthropy. This realization, coupled with the strategic planning that followed, marked a complete and profound shift in David's approach. He was no longer just internalizing slights or simmering with quiet resentment. He was actively, yet intelligently, seeking justice. He was breaking the cycle of suffering, not just for his family, but for anyone else Mark had undoubtedly wronged. This wasn't just about a personal vendetta. It was about setting a precedent, about showing that true strength lay not in bullying, but in courage, integrity, and the strategic pursuit of truth. The stage was set for a dramatic revelation, one that would redefine the meaning of consequence. David felt a newfound clarity, a sense of purpose that had been missing since the incident. He was ready. The days leading up to the gala were a blur of intense anxiety for David. He felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him, a constant knot in his stomach. He worried endlessly about what would happen if his plan failed, about the potential backlash, not just for him, but for Sarah and the kids. He saw the fear in Sarah's eyes sometimes, even when she tried to hide it, and it fueled his self-doubt. Was he doing the right thing? Was he risking too much? But Sarah, always his rock, became his unwavering ally. Instead of pulling away, she leaned in, offering a quiet strength that surprised even David. She'd listen patiently as he rehearsed his speech, pointing out areas where he could be clearer, or where his emotions might get the better of him. "David," she'd say, her hand firm on his arm, "you're doing this for us, for our kids, for everyone he's hurt. Don't back down now. Her words, simple and true, reinforced his resolve when it wavered most. He realized he wasn't alone in this fight. At the gala itself, the air was thick with polite chatter and the clinking of glasses. David, dressed in a borrowed suit, felt like an imposter among the city's elite. He watched Mark, resplendent and confident, working the room, shaking hands and flashing his practiced charismatic smile. A few attendees, initially impressed by Mark's public persona, started to notice subtle inconsistencies in his demeanor. A forced laugh here, a dismissive wave there. Nothing overt, but enough to plant a seed of doubt in observant eyes. Then a familiar voice cut through the noise. "David, is that you?" Two men in crisp uniforms, clearly former military, approached him. They were colleagues from his SEAL days, now working in security for a private firm. They recognized him instantly, despite the years. After quick, hushed greetings, they sensed the tension radiating from him. "Something's up, isn't it, buddy?" one of them asked, his gaze flicking to Mark across the room. David gave a subtle nod. Without a word, they offered quiet support, a silent promise to have his back. Sensing something significant was about to unfold. Others, however, loyal to Mark's well-crafted public image, remained skeptical. They gave David wary glances, whispering amongst themselves, clearly critical of his presence, wondering why this unstable man was even allowed inside. The cultural dynamics of the community played a crucial role here. This was a town with a deep, almost inherent respect for military service. Many attendees were veterans themselves or had family members serving. Mark's charity, ostensibly for veterans, had been a point of pride for many. The idea that someone so outwardly supportive could be so privately dismissive of those he claimed to help was a particularly egregious form of hypocrisy in this context. It wasn't just a slight, it was a betrayal of deeply held values. As David prepared to speak, waiting for his turn after Mark's grand introduction, he experienced a surge of emotions. Anger at Mark's deceit, a hot burning fury at the way he had twisted a noble cause for his own gain, fear, cold and sharp, for his family, for the consequences of this public confrontation. But beneath it all, a profound sense of purpose, a calm determination that settled over him like a cloak. He channeled these emotions, allowing them to sharpen his focus, not cloud his judgment. He would not let them consume him. He would use them. The weight of the moment was immense. The scrutiny from the crowd, the potential for failure, the knowledge that his family's peace hung in the balance. It was all overwhelming. But David, drawing upon years of SEAL training, the rigorous mental conditioning that taught him to perform under the most extreme pressure, maintained his composure. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding a steady rhythm. He walked to the podium, his posture straight, his eyes scanning the room, meeting the gazes of friend and foe alike. He delivered his carefully prepared exposé, not with anger, but with precision and conviction, each word a hammer blow against Mark's carefully constructed lies. He began to speak, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmuring crowd. He started by acknowledging the importance of supporting veterans, a sentiment that resonated deeply with the audience. Then he shifted. He didn't shout or accuse. Instead, he presented facts, calmly and methodically. He described the incident at the amusement park, detailing how Mark and his friends had bullied his family. He played the video footage he had discreetly recorded that day, showing Mark's aggressive behavior, his mocking words, his dismissive attitude. The video, raw and unfiltered, spoke volumes. Gasps rippled through the room. Then David revealed the second layer of Mark's deception. He presented evidence, gathered meticulously over weeks, of Mark's private disparagement of veterans, his cynical remarks about their struggles, and his true motivations for running the charity. Not out of genuine support, but for personal gain and public image. He showed financial irregularities, subtle at first glance, but damning when laid out clearly. There were inflated expenses, diverted funds, and a pattern of using the charity's resources for Mark's lavish lifestyle. It was all there, undeniable. The room fell silent as the weight of David's words settled. Mark, who had been standing near the stage, his face initially a mask of disbelief, slowly began to lose his composure. His practiced smile vanished, replaced by a pale, twitching grimace. He tried to interrupt, to deny, but his voice was weak, drowned out by the growing murmurs of outrage. The former military colleagues, who had offered David their quiet support earlier, now stood, their expressions grim, their eyes fixed on Mark. The charity organization, stunned and embarrassed, swiftly disassociated itself from Mark. Board members, some of whom had been genuinely unaware of the extent of his deceit, moved quickly to contain the damage. Public condemnation was immediate and widespread. Social media, which had once amplified Mark's fabricated public persona, now became a platform for his downfall, with the video footage from the park going viral. Investigations into the charity's finances were initiated almost immediately, revealing further improprieties that would lead to legal repercussions for Mark. His public life, once so carefully constructed, was in ruins. In the days and weeks that followed, David and his family found a profound sense of peace. The community, once subtly questioning David's earlier inaction, now rallied around them, offering support and respect. People approached David, not with questions, but with gratitude and admiration. The children, seeing their father stand up for what was right, began to heal from their trauma. The fear in their eyes was replaced by a quiet pride. They understood that their father hadn't been weak. He had been strategic. David reflected on the entire ordeal. He understood now, more deeply than ever, the importance of quiet strength. It wasn't about physical dominance or immediate retaliation. It was about courage, integrity, and strategic action. True strength, he realized, was the ability to remain calm under pressure, to assess a situation, and to act decisively and thoughtfully, not impulsively. It was about protecting those you love, not just from physical harm, but from the insidious pain of injustice and disrespect. Months later, the family enjoyed a peaceful, ordinary day at a local park, not an amusement park. The children laughed as they chased a ball. Sarah watched them with a serene smile, and David sat on a bench, a sense of quiet contentment settling over him. The dramatic events of the past were now just a memory, a stark contrast to the normalcy of their lives. Justice had prevailed not with a bang, but with the quiet, undeniable force of truth.